It reminds you that comfort and peace are not the same thing. Peace expands you, comfort contains you. Think back to a time in your life when you stepped into something unfamiliar. Maybe it was the first day at a new school, the first time you spoke in front of a crowd, the first time you said no to something everyone expected you to say yes to. Do you remember that feeling, the pulse in your chest? The sharp edge of fear mixed with possibility. That feeling, that tension, is life calling you forward. And yet, the moment we start to feel it, most of us retreat. We call it intuition, or not ready yet, but often it's just the body trying to protect us from the unknown. Because to the mind, unfamiliar equals unsafe. Even if that unfamiliar thing is exactly what would set you free. So here's the truth I want you to hold close. What feels familiar isn't always what's right for you. Your brain doesn't love truth, it loves repetition. It rewards the predictable and resists the unknown. But life, real life, happens in the unknown. Everything that ever changed you began there. Every new friend, every skill, every turning point in your story, all of it started as something unfamiliar. Yet, as adults, we start worshiping certainty. We trade wonder for control. And in that trade, we lose the most essential part of being human, the willingness to be surprised by ourselves. Let's talk about why this happens. It's not weakness. It's biology. Your brain is a pattern recognition machine. Its first and most important job is to keep you alive. And the easiest way to do that is by predicting what will happen next. Every time you repeat a pattern, a morning routine, a reaction, a way of thinking, the brain builds stronger neural pathways. Like trails in a forest, the ones you walk most often become clearer, smoother, automatic. That's why it's easier to repeat old behaviors than to create new ones. It's literally less energy. The brain loves efficiency. But the problem is, efficiency kills growth because growth requires friction. It demands that you step off the well-worn path and stumble into uncertainty. Here's the tricky part. The comfort zone doesn't trap you with fear, it traps you with logic. It sounds reasonable. It tells you, you're being responsible. Don't risk what you already have. Be grateful. People would kill for your life. And maybe all of that is true, but truth can still be a trap if it keeps you from moving. You stop dreaming because it feels childish. You stop experimenting because it feels impractical. You stop wanting because wanting makes you restless. The mind finds clever ways to dress stagnation as maturity. And the older we get, the better we become at calling fear wisdom. Psychologists call it cognitive ease. It means the brain prefers anything it can process quickly. If something feels easy to understand, it feels true, even if it isn't. That's why repetition is powerful, not because it's accurate, but because it's familiar. The more you see or do something, the safer it feels. Think about the person who stays in a toxic relationship, telling themselves, "At least I know what to expect." Or the employee who says, "I can't complain, it's a steady paycheck," even as their spirit withers. These are not failures of willpower. They are symptoms of a nervous system addicted to predictability. Your brain doesn't care about your fulfillment, it cares about your survival. And to your brain, survival means staying where the pattern is known. So the mind builds stories to justify the familiar. I'm just not lucky. It's too late to start over. I'm happy enough. I'll change when things calm down. Each of these is a small fence you build around your own potential. And after a while, you forget that you built it yourself. Because when you hear the same story long enough, it stops sounding like a story. It starts sounding like truth. There's something else that keeps you trapped. Emotional memory. Your body remembers the feeling of every failure, every rejection, every time you stepped out and got hurt. So when a new opportunity appears, your nervous system doesn't just think, it feels the echoes of those past experiences. It whispers, "Remember what happened last time." And before you even realize it, you've talked yourself out of trying. But that's the paradox. Healing doesn't come from avoiding the feelings that once hurt you. It comes from proving to your body that you can survive them. Every time you do something new and live through it, your nervous system learns that fear is not fatal. And that lesson rewires everything. You can live an entire life inside the familiar and still call it happiness. You can smile, succeed, post photos that make it look like you're thriving and still feel the quiet ache of unlived potential. Because comfort doesn't make you miserable. It makes you numb, and numbness is harder to notice than pain. Pain shouts, numbness whispers. That's why people can sleepwalk through decades without realizing they've stopped evolving. They confuse the absence of pain with the presence of peace. But peace isn't the lack of movement, it's the harmony between who you are and who you're becoming. Awareness always begins with discomfort. It's that unsettling realization. Something about this isn't right anymore. You can't always name it. You just feel it, a restlessness that doesn't go away with distraction. Maybe you start to wake up earlier without knowing why. You find yourself staring out windows longer, thinking about roads you've never taken. You catch yourself saying, "There has to be more than this." That's not dissatisfaction, that's awakening. That's life tapping on the walls of your comfort zone, asking if you're still awake inside it. There's a strange thing that happens when awareness begins to grow. You don't suddenly want to burn your whole life down. You simply begin to see the edges of your routine start to flicker. The conversations you used to enjoy feel scripted. The places that once calmed you start to feel a little too quiet. It's like waking up in a room you've lived in for years and realizing that the wallpaper is peeling. It's always been peeling. You just never looked closely enough to notice. That's how transformation begins, not with a dramatic explosion, but with small questions whispered to yourself when the world isn't watching. Is this still me? Am I living? Or just maintaining? And perhaps the most honest one, if I wasn't afraid, what would I do differently? There's an old story about a bird that lived inside a golden cage. Every morning, its owner would clean the bars, feed it the finest seeds, and even play soft music to keep it company. From the outside, the bird's life looked perfect, safe, cared for, predictable. But one day, a gust of wind blew through the window, and the bird caught the scent of open air. For the first time, it realized something was missing, not comfort, not food, but freedom. When the door was left open the next morning, the bird froze. It could have flown out at any moment, but it didn't. The sky was too wide, the air too unfamiliar, and so it stayed. Most of us live like that bird, surrounded by everything we think we need, but haunted by the echo of something we can't quite name. Not knowing that the thing we call safety is just a beautiful cage built from habit. Here's the part we rarely talk about. The familiar isn't just what we do, it's who we think we are. Your routines, your surroundings, even your struggles, they all form part of your identity. That's why change feels like death to the ego. When you step outside the familiar, you don't just risk failure, you risk losing a version of yourself. Maybe you've stayed in a role as a caretaker, a provider, a strong one, because people depend on that version of you. You tell yourself, they need me like this, but sometimes they don't, you do. Because that role makes you feel safe, valuable, predictable. Growth threatens that. It says, maybe you're more than the person you've learned to be, and that's terrifying. It sounds strange, but humans often choose predictable suffering over uncertain freedom. We stay in jobs that drain us, relationships that shrink us, environments that numb us, not because we enjoy them, but because at least they're known. The unknown feels like chaos, and chaos threatens the illusion of control we've built our lives upon. But here's the irony. The more we try to control everything, the smaller our world becomes. We shrink our possibilities to match our fears. Freedom, by contrast, is wild. It doesn't guarantee outcomes, it only guarantees aliveness. And that's the trade we all must face, Would you rather feel safe, or would you rather feel alive? If you've ever stood in front of a mirror and not recognized the person staring back, you know what awakening feels like? There's a flicker of grief for the time you lost being someone smaller than you are. And there's also wonder, realizing that it's not too late to become something new. In that moment, you understand something profound. You can't heal in the same environment that made you forget who you are. The rooms, the faces, the conversations that once protected you might now be the very things keeping you numb. And walking away from them doesn't mean you're ungrateful. It means you've outgrown them. When your soul is ready for change, your body knows before your mind does. It shows up as fatigue, tension, insomnia, loss of excitement. You start getting headaches that no medicine fixes. Your energy drops in places that used to inspire you. You catch colds more often, or you wake up heavy even after sleep. That's not coincidence, that's communication. Your body is saying, "We've been here too long," but most of us don't listen. We medicate, distract, power through, mistaking suppression for strength. We forget that rest and avoidance are not the same thing. Every version of you was necessary once, even the ones that kept you stuck. The fearful version taught you caution. The overachiever taught you discipline. The pleaser taught you connection. But at some point, their lessons end. And when they do, you have to let them die, not with anger, but with gratitude. That's what evolution looks like, not becoming someone new, but releasing who you no longer need to be. Yet this letting go doesn't happen in one clean motion. It happens in layers, through small deaths, the death of pretending, the death of over-explaining, the death of pleasing, the death of waiting for permission, and with every death, a little more truth is born. We tell ourselves we'll change when we're ready, when the timing is right, when we feel confident enough. But readiness is a myth. No one is ever ready to leave the familiar. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the willingness to walk with it. To say, "I don't know where this leads, but staying here costs me more." The truth is, fear never leaves. It just changes shape. You learn to walk beside it like an old companion, one who once tried to protect you, but no longer knows what you need. And the more you move, the quieter it becomes. A young student once asked his teacher, "How will I know when it's time to move on?" The teacher smiled and said, "When the lesson you're repeating starts to hurt more than it helps." We all repeat lessons, relationships, patterns, habits, thinking this time it will be different. But growth only happens when the pain of staying the same outweighs the fear of changing. That's the moment the door appears. You might not walk through it right away. But once you've seen it, you can't pretend it's not there. There's a voice that speaks beneath the noise of your daily life. It's not loud, it doesn't beg, it simply knows. You hear it when you're driving alone with no music on. You hear it in the shower, in the pauses between your own thoughts. It says things like, "This isn't you anymore. There's more waiting. You've done this chapter. It's time for another." That's not your imagination. That's intuition, the compass beneath your conditioning. And the more you listen to it, the stronger it becomes. But the more you ignore it, the quieter it gets. Until one day, you can't hear it at all. And that silence becomes the loudest ache of your life. Ignoring that inner pull doesn't just keep you still, it eats away your joy. You start to resent the very things you once prayed for. The job, the house, the relationship, they start to feel like chains instead of blessings. And that resentment isn't about them, it's about you. Because something inside you knows you're meant for more than repetition. The cost of staying the same isn't comfort, it's slow erosion. You lose curiosity, you lose aliveness, you lose the ability to be surprised by life. That's the quiet tragedy of the comfort zone. It doesn't destroy you dramatically. It dissolves you gently, one predictable day at a time. But the moment you choose to move, even a little, the energy shifts. You don't need to quit your job or leave your city tomorrow. You just need to do one thing differently. Take a new route home. Talk to someone who thinks differently than you. Spend 10 minutes a day doing something that doesn't serve a goal, only curiosity. That's how the mind starts to stretch again. That's how the walls begin to crack. Because change doesn't start with a leap, it starts with a whisper that says, "What if?" And the moment you follow that whisper, life starts whispering back. Most people think courage feels like certainty. But it doesn't. It feels like trembling hands, a shaky voice, and a heart that beats too fast. It feels like walking across a bridge made of fog, trusting that each step will appear only after you take it. Faith isn't about believing everything will work out. It's believing you'll be okay even if it doesn't. And that's the difference between fear and faith. Fear asks, "What if I fall?" Faith asks, "What if I fly?" When you start to change, even quietly, the world around you reacts. Some people will sense it before you say a word. They'll notice the difference in your eyes, in your silence, in the way you stop agreeing to things you don't believe in. And that's when it happens, the resistance. Not everyone wants you to grow. Not because they're cruel, but because your growth reminds them of their own stillness. When you start walking out of the familiar, you hold up a mirror to everyone still sitting inside it. So they'll call you restless and grateful, maybe even lost. But remember this, evolution never looks graceful in the beginning. It looks like confusion. It looks like detachment. It looks like you're falling apart, when in truth, you're only shedding what no longer fits. Every transformation begins with disruption. Something has to break for light to get in. It could be a loss, a heartbreak, a sudden emptiness you didn't plan for. We tend to think pain means something went wrong, but often pain is the intelligence of life itself. It comes to shake you out of autopilot, to make you question what you've accepted as normal. You might think you're being punished, when really, you're being invited to meet yourself on the other side of comfort. There's a river that flows through every human life. For a while, you can build your house on its shore, watch it, name it, control it. But eventually, the river rises. It pulls at the walls you built, floods the ground beneath your feet. That's not destruction, it's movement. The river is saying, you were never meant to stay on the bank. You were meant to flow. So you let go one branch, one stone, one illusion at a time until you're in the current. At first, you panic, you think, I'll drown. But then you realize the water was never here to kill you. It was here to carry you. Change isn't just external, it's cellular. Every belief, every attachment, every memory is stored in the body. When you start to shift, your nervous system trembles. That trembling is not weakness, it's release. You're teaching your body that it's safe to live differently. That's why transformation feels like grief. You're mourning the old rhythm, the predictability that once kept you stable. And grief is not a sign you're doing it wrong. It's proof that you're doing it for real. Every ending deserves to be mourned, even the ones you chose. Healing doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it feels like chaos because you're dismantling the structures that numbed you. You stop running. You stop hiding behind productivity. You sit with silence, and suddenly the noise inside you gets louder. But that's not regression. That's honesty. You're hearing yourself without filters for the first time. The paradox is that healing looks like falling apart, but what's really falling apart are your illusions. After the storm of awareness, there's always a strange calm. The world looks the same, but you don't. Colors are sharper. Time moves differently. You notice beauty in small things again, sunlight through curtains, laughter from another room, the sound of your own breathing. This is the first taste of freedom, the ability to be present again. To feel instead of analyze, to exist without defending your existence. It's subtle, but it's real, a soft rebirth that doesn't need applause. There's a story about a woman who spent her whole life searching for freedom. She read every book, took every course, traveled across countries. And one evening, exhausted, she sat down on her porch and felt something in her pocket. It was a small key, one she'd carried for years without noticing. When she looked up, she realized she'd been sitting outside her own locked house. The door was never broken, she'd just forgotten she already held the key. That's what self-awareness does. It doesn't hand you something new. It shows you what was already in your pocket. You've always had the key, you just stopped believing you did. Fear doesn't disappear as you grow, it evolves. It used to say, "Don't go." Now it says, "Don't forget where you came from," and that's okay. Because fear isn't your enemy, it's your compass, pointing you toward the places that matter. Every time you move toward what scares you, you reclaim a piece of your power. Fear marks the edges of expansion. Wherever you feel it, something sacred is waiting. We've been taught that strength is hard, loud, unshakable, invincible. But real strength is soft. It's the ability to stay open when it would be easier to close. To keep your heart gentle in a world that worships armor. Soft strength is the whisper that says, "I can be scared and still move." It's patience with yourself when progress feels slow. It's kindness toward the versions of you that are still learning how to let go. Because transformation is not a race, it's a rhythm. And each step, even the trembling ones, counts. Becoming isn't linear. Some days you'll feel limitless. Other days, you'll feel like you've fallen back into old patterns. That's okay. Growth loops. It spirals. It revisits the same lessons at deeper levels. You're not failing, you're deepening. Every revisit is a chance to integrate what you once only understood intellectually. So when you catch yourself repeating something you thought you'd outgrown, pause and ask, what part of me still needs to be seen? Because that's what the universe does. It keeps handing you the same mirror until you finally look with compassion. Freedom isn't the absence of limits. It's the presence of awareness. You'll never reach a point where fear disappears or where uncertainty feels comfortable. Freedom is simply the willingness to feel all of it and move anyway. It's waking up each day and choosing not to abandon yourself. It's understanding that safety isn't outside. It's the trust you build within. And once you touch that inner safety, you realize the world was never your cage. Your fear was. Here's the revelation most people miss. You were never trapped by circumstance. You were trapped by identification. You thought you were your patterns, your history, your story. But those are just costumes you wore to survive. You can take them off. The person you've always been is still there, quiet, patient, waiting beneath the noise. Every time you choose honesty over approval, truth over comfort, you peel away another layer that kept you from her. That's the real awakening, realizing that you don't need to become someone new. You just need to remember who you are when you're not afraid. Imagine you've been climbing a mountain your whole life. Everyone told you that at the top, you'd find success, peace, meaning. You climbed for years, tired, focused, determined. And when you finally reach the summit, you realize the view is beautiful, but empty. Then, in the distance, you notice another mountain, smaller, unpolished, wild. And somehow, you know that's where you were meant to go all along. The catch, to reach it, you have to climb back down. You have to unlearn everything that made you proud of your current peak. That's what awakening feels like, realizing the mountain you conquered was never yours, and having the courage to start again, lower, humbler, freer. There's something profoundly sacred about beginning again, not from failure, but from clarity. You see the world with different eyes. You stop rushing. You start noticing. You no longer chase meaning. You create it in every small act of presence. In the way you listen, in the way you breathe, in the way you love without needing to be understood. That's when life stops feeling like something you have to manage and starts feeling like something you get to experience. Courage doesn't roar. It whispers. It says, "One more try." It says, "I'll open my heart again." It says, "This time, I won't run. And sometimes that's enough, one quiet decision at a time. Because courage compounds, each small act of honesty builds the foundation for the next. And before you know it, you become someone you once envied, not because your life looks different, but because you finally feel authentic inside it. At some point, the journey stops being about escaping the cage and starts being about remembering that you were never locked in it to begin with. The door was always open. You just needed to trust yourself enough to walk through. That's the quiet miracle of growth. It doesn't remove fear. It redefines it. Fear becomes a doorway. Uncertainty becomes a compass. And the unknown becomes home. You realize that what once terrified you is now what keeps you alive. And for the first time in a long time, you feel something pure, peace. Not because everything is easy, but because you're no longer at war with yourself. There's a part of every transformation that feels like coming home. But this home isn't a place, it's a state of being. It's the soft knowing that wherever you go, you can trust your own presence. You stop searching for belonging in other people. You stop proving your worth through productivity. You start living in alignment, quiet, grounded, free. The people who belong in this version of your life will meet you there. Some won't, and that's okay. Not everyone is meant to stay for the whole story. Some were only chapters. You can love them and still let them go. As you walk lighter, you start to notice how much weight you've been carrying, not physical weight, but emotional luggage, expectations, regret, guilt, the endless pressure to be understood. You start to set it down one piece at a time. You stop apologizing for evolving. You stop explaining your piece to those who mistake it for distance. Because you finally understand, your healing is not an apology, it's a declaration. You are no longer shrinking yourself to fit into stories you've outgrown. You are writing new ones with gentler hands. There's a story of an old sailor who spent his life fearing the ocean. He lived on the shore, mending nets, watching the waves, always saying, "One day, I'll go." Years passed. His beard turned white, his hands rough from waiting. And one morning, he decided to step into the boat. The sea was vast, wild, unpredictable, but it wasn't cruel. It simply reflected back his own resistance. He realized the ocean had never been his enemy, it was his teacher. Every wave said, "Trust me, you are made to move." That's what life does too. It waits patiently until you're ready to sail into your own depth. When you've walked far enough, you stop needing to rush anywhere. There's a stillness that comes, not from giving up, but from finally arriving. You sit under a quiet sky, breathe deeper than you have in years, and realize you're no longer chasing peace, you are peace. That's the secret of all journeys. You search and search until you discover that what you were seeking was never outside of you. It was buried under layers of noise, fear, and pretending. And when those layers fall away, what's left is simplicity, the kind of quiet that doesn't need to be proven. In this new life, the ordinary becomes extraordinary again. You wake up and notice the sound of morning birds, the way sunlight dances through dust, the way your breath moves effortlessly, freely. You laugh more, not because life got easier, but because you stopped expecting it to be perfect. You no longer measure days by how much you achieved, but by how present you felt. You start to see miracles in the mundane, the kind of beauty that only reveals itself when you slow down enough to notice. Confidence doesn't come from knowing you'll succeed. It comes from knowing you'll survive even if you don't. That realization changes everything. You stop living from fear of failure and start living from trust in resilience. You begin to take risks not because you're sure, but because you're curious. You follow your intuition not because it's logical, but because it's alive. And slowly, the familiar no longer feels like safety. It feels like stagnation. You crave the unknown because that's where your soul breathes. Uncertainty isn't chaos, it's creation. It's the blank canvas of every masterpiece, the silence before every symphony. The familiar feels safe because it's finished. But life was never meant to be finished. It was meant to be lived, explored, rewritten. So instead of asking, what if it doesn't work out? You begin to ask, what might I learn if I try? And that simple shift turns fear into wonder. You start to see that life's beauty isn't in control, but in surrender. When you live in presence, everything slows down, time stretches. You begin to feel the full texture of existence, not just its surface. You realize that joy isn't in grand moments, but in the quiet ones, in deep breaths, in honest conversations, in forgiving yourself for not knowing sooner. Presence doesn't demand that you fix yourself. It invites you to meet yourself as you are here, now. And in that meeting, something magical happens. The past loses its grip, the future loses its pull, and you become whole again. Eventually, you'll return to the same places that once felt like cages, and this time, they'll feel different. Not because the places changed, but because you did. You'll walk through familiar streets and feel no pull to stay. You'll see old versions of yourself reflected in others and feel gratitude instead of shame. You'll realize that freedom was never about escape, it was about perspective. You can stand in the same room that once confined you and feel infinite inside it. That's when you know the work is done, not because life got easier, but because you did. There's an ancient story about a traveler who spent years searching for a sacred temple said to hold the secret of freedom. He crossed mountains, deserts, oceans, asking every wise person he met along the way. But no one could tell him exactly where it was. One day, exhausted and lost, he found an old monk sitting beneath a tree. The traveler asked, "Please, tell me where to find the temple." The monk smiled softly and said, "The door to the temple is not in the world. It's inside you." The traveler frowned, "But how do I open it?" The monk replied, "By becoming quiet enough to hear the key turn. That's all awakening ever is, the sound of the lock opening inside your own chest." When you come back from that kind of inner journey, the world doesn't look different, you do. You carry a softness now. You listen more. You need less. You smile easier. You don't rush to fix everything. You don't chase validation. You simply live deeply, deliberately, with gratitude for both the light and the shadow. Because you understand that both shaped you, both were teachers. And you wouldn't trade your story, not even the painful parts, because they led you here to yourself. Maybe the question was never, how do I escape my cage? Maybe it was always, how do I stop mistaking my comfort for safety? Because when you stop confusing the two, life opens. You begin to walk with curiosity again. You start asking different questions, not, what will happen to me, but who might I become if I try? And that's when the miracle happens. You stop surviving and start living. You begin to see that the most dangerous comfort isn't external. It's the belief that you already know who you are. When you let that belief go, everything becomes possible again. So take a breath, a slow one. Feel it move through your chest. This is life, right here, right now, not tomorrow, not someday, now. Everything you've ever needed to start again is already inside you. The courage, the clarity, the strength, they were never lost, only buried beneath layers of habit and fear. And when you peel them back, what you find is simple, but powerful. You were never broken. You were only becoming. So if something in you has been whispering that it's time, listen. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Don't wait to feel ready. Start where you are, with what you have, and trust that the next step will reveal itself. Because the truth is, you can't stay in the same place and expect a different life. You can't cling to comfort and hope for freedom, but you can choose to begin. You can walk out of the familiar, one honest breath at a time. And when you do, when you finally step through that invisible door, you'll look back and realize that the cage was never real. It was only the echo of your own fear.